My name is Wendy Thomas. I'm 29 years old and I work as a registered nurse. 3 weeks after a car accident nearly killed me, I woke up in a hospital bed with broken ribs, stitches across my side, and a truth I never expected to hear. While I was unconscious, my father had signed a Do Not Resuscitate order for me. He didn't sign it because the doctors said I was beyond saving. He signed it because someone told him how much the surgery would cost. According to the nurse who witnessed it, he looked at the doctor, barely hesitated, and said the words that would echo in my mind for months afterwards. "Let her go. We're not paying for that surgery." Then he signed the form. It happened at 11:18 p.m. on a Tuesday night. By the time I woke up 3 weeks later, the damage to my body was severe. But the damage to my understanding of my family would turn out to be far worse. And the strangest part of all? That signed DNR wasn't even the worst thing my father did while I was lying there in a coma. What I did after waking up didn't just expose him. It destroyed everything he had built. But to understand how it got to that point, we have to go back a few months earlier. Back to the day my grandmother died.
Filmpflichtig von bleiben sich ein meisten tue, sage 2000 Nis.
I was born with a hole in my heart. Doctors called it a ventricular septal defect. To my father, it was simply a bill. When I was 4 years old, surgeons operated for 11 hours to repair it. I survived. My parents spent the next 2 decades paying off the medical debt. Or at least, that's how my father always framed it. "You know how much you cost this family?" he once asked me. I was 8 years old. I had asked for a new pair of sneakers because mine leaked when it rained. My father sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of hospital bills. He didn't even look up when he answered. $214,000, he said.
That's what you cost.
I never asked for sneakers again.
Lehrleist, Sattenbab.
By the time I turned 12, I had already learned the rules of our house. My older sister Meredith received the things children usually expect.
Birthday dinners.
School trips. A car when she turned 16. Meanwhile, I worked.
At 12, I started babysitting for neighbors.
At 15, I used the money to buy my own clothes and school supplies. When Meredith left for college, my parents paid her tuition in full. When I graduated high school 3 years later, I signed student loan documents alone. Nobody even questioned it. Not my teachers.
Not my relatives.
Not even me. Because by that point I believed the same thing my father had told me for years. That I owed them. Every time I looked at the scar on my chest, I remembered the number he repeated so often. $214,000. It felt like a debt I would spend my life repaying.
Sind wieder Person.
The only person who never treated me like a financial burden was my grandmother. Her name was Lillian Price. She lived in a small brick house in Norristown, Pennsylvania. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. A front porch with a swing that creaked every time the wind picked up. She had lived there for more than 40 years. After I finished nursing school, I began visiting her every Saturday. The drive took about 40 minutes. I'd bring groceries, check her blood pressure, and sit with her on the porch swing while she talked about the garden or the neighbors or the way the seasons changed the color of the trees. Unlike my father, she never mentioned the cost of my childhood surgery. Instead, she asked things like,
"Are you eating enough?
Are you sleeping after those night shifts? Tell me about the patients you helped this week. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone saw me as more than a debt.
V.
Near the end of her life, when her hands had begun to shake and her voice sometimes faded mid-sentence, she said something that confused me. I remember the afternoon clearly. We were sitting on the porch. The garden smelled like rosemary and damp soil. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "I've taken care of some things for you," she said quietly. "When the time comes, a man named Kessler will find you."
I laughed softly.
"Grandma, what are you talking about?" But she only smiled. "You'll understand later." At the time, I assumed it was the medication making her confused. She was 84. Sometimes older people drift between memories and present moments. But my grandmother wasn't confused. She was preparing. I just didn't realize it yet.
Werde ist das Ehehabeleben.
My father hated that I visited her. "You're wasting gas," he'd complain whenever he found out. "She barely remembers you." But that wasn't true.
Grandma Lillian remembered everything,
including things my father hoped she had forgotten.
Armer Posten, dieses Gen unterliegte sicher.
She died on a Thursday in March. Peacefully in her sleep inside that same brick house. My father organized the funeral quickly. Too quickly. "Keep it short," he told me outside the funeral home. "We're not turning this into a spectacle." He didn't allow me to read a eulogy. So I stood in the back row while people spoke about her kindness and generosity.
I said goodbye in silence.
But before the service ended, I remembered the last thing she told me. "A man named Kessler will find you." I didn't know who Kessler was. And for several months, nothing happened. Life moved forward. Work shifts.
Hospitalroutines. Long nights and early mornings. Until one rainy morning changed everything. Achterschwünglich kennen verprägen dem dessen zu wuchen.
3 months after her funeral, I was driving home from a 12-hour night shift. It was just after 4:17 a.m. I remember the time because I was calculating how many hours of sleep I could get before my next shift. 6 hours if I skipped breakfast.
5 if I showered first.
I never finished the calculation.
A pickup truck ran a red light.
It hit the driver's side of my car going nearly 50 miles per hour. The force folded the frame inward like paper. I was conscious for less than 2 minutes.
Long enough to tell the paramedics my name.
Then everything went black.
C-V-I-H-N-A-N-N.
The doctors later explained what happened. Brain swelling. Internal bleeding.
4 broken ribs.
Emergency surgery within the hour. But the bleeding didn't stop. They needed a second operation. A specialist. More time in the operating room. And someone had to approve it. Because I wasn't married. I had no children. The emergency contact listed on my hospital records was the same one my father insisted I add when I turned 18.
Gerald Thomas.
My father. The hospital called him at 10:30 p.m. He arrived 17 minutes later. And the first place he went wasn't my room. It was the billing department. He asked only one question. "How much is this going to cost?" What happened after that conversation would eventually reach me through someone who had witnessed everything. A nurse named Patricia Walsh. Everyone at the hospital called her Pat. She had worked there for 28 years. And she remembered every word my father said that night. Because when the doctor explained the cost of the surgery, my father made a decision that would have ended my life if someone else hadn't intervened. But the person who saved me wasn't a doctor. It wasn't family. It was someone my father never even thought to check. And what that person did next changed the entire outcome of my story.
Emergency contacts.
And something else many people ignore. A healthcare proxy designation. 3 years earlier, I had filled out that section carefully. I didn't list my father.
I listed my best friend, Deborah Owens.
S. Deborah and I had met during nursing school. We survived anatomy exams, night shifts, and terrible cafeteria coffee together. When the form asked who I trusted to make medical decisions for me if I couldn't, her name was the only one that made sense. Pat found the document within 2 minutes. Deborah's name. Her phone number. Her signature confirming the responsibility. Everything was clearly recorded. Pat picked up the phone and dialed. It was 11:14 p.m. Deborah answered on the second ring. Pat didn't waste time. She explained the accident,
The coma.
the surgery, and the fact that my father had just signed an order to let me die. Deborah didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. She said 3 words.
I'm leaving now. Nicht.
Deborah lived about 45 minutes away in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. That night it took her nearly 90 minutes to reach the hospital. Rain slowed traffic. But she didn't stop. She walked into St. Catherine's just before 1 a.m. She brought 2 things with her. Her driver's license and a copy of the healthcare proxy form she had kept in her filing cabinet. Her hands were shaking when she handed it to the nurse. But her voice was steady. I'm Wendy's medical proxy, she said.
I revoke the DNR.
Then she signed the authorization for surgery.
Echtig Meteorite spielt von ein natürliche Superfekt und finden, wo du ins Bett hast. Profitierung ist Sicht von ein Zucruis von ans Gewinn. Eelstig und Riegel.
The surgical team began preparing immediately. Dr. Hale returned to the operating room. The specialist was called in. Within an hour, the second surgery began. By that time, my father was already home, sleeping. As far as he knew, the machines would be turned off. The hospital would call him in the morning, and his daughter would be gone. But that call never came, because the DNR order had been overturned, and the surgery that saved my life had already begun.
Ma, in festige Wände.
Pat didn't stop there. Before her shift ended, she opened a formal incident report. Hospitals take documentation seriously, especially when ethical concerns arise. She recorded everything. The exact time my father arrived. His conversation with the billing department. The moment he signed the DNR form. And the words he used when he told the doctor not to operate. She included timestamps, witness names, every detail. Then she submitted the report through the hospital's internal system. After that, she shut down her computer and sat alone in the break room for 20 minutes.
O werde?
My father slept peacefully that night, believing he had made the final decision, believing the hospital would soon confirm that his daughter was gone. But the next morning he made another decision, one that would turn out to be far worse than the first. While doctors worked to keep me alive, my father decided to take something else that belonged to me, something he assumed I would never be able to stop him from taking: my grandmother's house. And what he did to claim it would eventually expose everything, because the house on Elm Street wasn't actually his to take. My grandmother had already arranged something he didn't know about, something she had quietly planned years earlier. And the person who helped her do it was finally about to appear. I opened my eyes on a Tuesday morning. At first, everything looked strange. The light above me was bright and flat, the kind of sterile blue-white glow only hospitals have. It reflected off the metal rails of the bed and the plastic tubes connected to my arms. I knew that light. I had spent 6 years working under it. But I had never been the patient before. My chest felt heavy. My ribs burned every time I tried to breathe deeply. My throat felt raw, like sandpaper. Later I learned it was because the breathing tube had only been removed a few hours earlier. For a moment I just lay there blinking slowly, trying to figure out where I was and how I had gotten there. The machines beside the bed beeped steadily. Each sound felt strangely familiar. Then a face came into view beside me. It wasn't my father. It wasn't my sister. It was Pat. She stood beside the window with her arms folded, watching the monitors. When she saw my eyes open, she didn't panic or call for the doctor. Instead, she calmly pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. Her hand closed gently around mine. "You're safe," she said. Her voice was steady. "Take it slow." I tried to speak.
Only a rough whisper came out.
"How long?" 3 weeks, she answered quietly. The words took a moment to settle in. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of my life had simply vanished. I swallowed painfully. Did the surgery work? "It did," she said. "You're going to recover."
I closed my eyes again.
Not because I was tired. Because I was trying to remember.
Rain. A traffic light.
Headlights rushing toward me. The crash. Then, nothing.
And then
My father arrived later that afternoon. The nurses logged his visit time. 2:17 p.m. I noticed the exact moment he appeared in the doorway. There was a brief flash of something on his face. Surprise! Not relief. Surprise! Then the expression changed quickly, replaced by something softer. Practiced. "Oh, sweetheart," he said as he rushed to the bed. His voice trembled just enough to sound emotional. "We were so scared." He grabbed my hand. Tears appeared instantly in his eyes. "Thank God you're okay." I watched him carefully. Working in a hospital teaches you something about people. You learn to recognize the difference between real fear and something rehearsed.
real fear looks raw.
Uncontrolled. My father looked controlled. Perfectly controlled.
"Hi, Dad," I whispered.
Reflect. Meredith didn't visit that day. Instead, a delivery driver dropped off flowers. A generic bouquet ordered online. A small card inside simply said, "Get well soon." 2 days passed before my sister finally appeared. By then I could sit up in bed without help. The bruises on my arms had started turning yellow. My ribs still hurt when I moved. But my mind was clearer. Pat chose that afternoon to tell me what happened. The hallway outside my room was quiet. Shift change had just finished. Pat closed the door and sat in the same chair beside my bed. She took a moment before speaking. "Wendy," she said, "there's something you need to know." I nodded slowly. "Go ahead." She looked directly at me. "The night of your accident, your father came to the hospital." "I know," I said. "He told me he was here every day." Pat shook her head. "No. He came once." The words hung in the air. "He spoke to Dr. Hale about the surgery," she continued. "He asked how much it would cost." I stayed silent. "And then he told the doctor you didn't have a healthcare proxy." I frowned slightly. "But I do." "I know," Pat said. "That's the next part." She took a slow breath. "Your father signed a Do Not Resuscitate order." For a moment, the room felt completely silent. Even the monitor seemed quieter. What?" I asked softly. "He signed a DNR." "On me?" "Yes." I stared at the ceiling. The bright hospital light blurred slightly. "What exactly did he say?" I asked. Pat didn't hesitate. His exact words were, "Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. She's been a financial drain her whole life." I closed my eyes. Not because I was shocked, because hearing it out loud made something fall into place. A truth that had always existed just beneath the surface. To my father, I wasn't a daughter. I was a bill.
Lot kommen. How am I still alive?
I asked finally. Pat smiled slightly. "I checked your employee file." "And?" "You had a healthcare proxy listed." "Deborah." "Exactly." Pat explained everything. The phone call.
Deborah driving through the rain.
The surgery that started after midnight. By the time Pat finished speaking, I felt strangely calm. Angry. But calm. "Is what he did recorded anywhere?" I asked. Pat nodded.
Incident report.
Filed and time-stamped. I opened my eyes again. Good. Then I reached toward the bedside drawer. "Can you hand me my phone?" She did.
The screen lit up.
32 missed calls from my father. 11 messages from Meredith. I ignored all of them. Instead, I opened my contacts and searched for a name I hadn't thought about in months.
Kessler.
The name my grandmother mentioned before she died.
I pressed call. The phone rang twice.
Then a calm voice answered.
Donald Kessler speaking.
"Mr. Kessler," I said quietly.
My name is Wendy Thomas. There was a brief pause.
Then he replied gently. "I've been trying to reach you for months."
My heart skipped.
"What do you mean?" "Your grandmother asked me to handle her estate." He explained that 2 years earlier my grandmother had come to his office. Not the family lawyer. Someone completely independent. She wrote a private will. One that named exactly 2 things.
The house on Elm Street.
And a trust account containing $85,000. Both left solely to me.
My breath caught.
The probate process finished 5 months ago, he said. The deed transfer was recorded under your name.
I sent letters.
I made phone calls. Someone told me you had moved away and didn't want contact. My father, of course it was him. I've been in a coma, I said. I was in a car accident. Kessler was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry to hear that. Mr. Kessler, I asked slowly.
Is the house still in my name?
There was a pause. Let me check the county records, he said. I'll call you back within the hour.
Ist Effekt. Diese Fakt des Anderschen ist legalisär in den Leiden wirklich ist zu arm. Meine aus Troes ist zu sehr von Tran, sie zu. Feinde mehr zu halten ist Effekt.
I hung up and stared at the ceiling. Pat stood quietly near the door. You okay? She asked. I think so. My grandmother had planned something.
I could feel it now.
An hour later, my phone rang again. Kessler's voice sounded different this time. More serious. Miss Thomas, he said. The property was transferred out of your name 3 weeks ago. My chest tightened. To who?
Gerald Thomas.
My father. Using a power of attorney.
I sat upright slowly.
Pain shot through my ribs. I never signed a power of attorney, I said. I know, Kessler replied calmly. Which means the document is almost certainly forged. And that was the moment I realized something. While I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, my father hadn't just tried to let me die. He had also tried to steal my inheritance. But he made one mistake. He assumed I would never wake up. And he didn't know that the woman who raised me had already prepared for exactly this moment. When Donald Kessler finished explaining what had happened to my grandmother's house, I felt something settle inside me. It wasn't panic. It wasn't grief. It was clarity. For most of my life, my father had convinced me that I owed him everything. That the surgery when I was 4 years old had placed me in permanent debt to the family. But lying in that hospital bed, listening to a lawyer explain that my father had forged documents while I was unconscious, I realized something important. Debt works both ways. And my father had just created one he could never repay. 2 days after that phone call, Mr. Kessler came to the hospital in person. He was a tall man in his late 60s with silver hair and a voice so calm it made every sentence sound deliberate. He placed a thin folder on the tray table beside my bed. Inside were copies of the documents my father had submitted to transfer the property. The power of attorney form looked official at first glance.
It carried my name.
My supposed signature. Even a notary stamp. But the moment I saw the handwriting, I knew. That wasn't my signature. Not even close. Did the county verify this? I asked. Kessler nodded slowly. Unfortunately, property offices process thousands of filings every month. They assume documents are legitimate unless someone challenges them. So he just walked in and filed this? Essentially. I stared at the paper again. My father hadn't even tried to hide what he was doing. He assumed I would never wake up, which meant he never expected anyone to question it.
Ist dog.
Kessler flipped to another document. This is the hospital timeline, he said. The incident report Pat had filed was attached to the back. Every detail was there. The time my father arrived.
The billing conversation.
The exact moment he signed the DNR order. Kessler studied the report carefully. You understand what this means legally, right?
I nodded slowly.
Forgery, I said.
Fraud.
And attempted unlawful property transfer. He looked at me carefully. There's also the ethical question of signing a DNR for financial reasons. My jaw tightened. Can that be proven? Kessler tapped the report. The nurse documented his exact statement. Let her go. We're not paying for the surgery. Even reading the words on paper made my stomach turn.
Enzylpertefrie.
What happens next? I asked. Kessler leaned back in his chair. That depends on you. You have several options. He held up 3 fingers. First, we file a civil claim. That forces the property back into your name. Second, we report the forgery to the district attorney. And third, we confront him privately and demand he correct the filing himself. I stared at the ceiling for a moment. Growing up, confrontation with my father never ended well. He dominated every conversation,
every argument.
But this situation was different. This time I had evidence. And more importantly, I had witnesses. I want him to fix it publicly, I said. Kessler raised an eyebrow. Publicly? Yes. For 30 years he's told everyone how much I cost him. I looked back at the documents. This time, I want the truth to cost him something. Kessler didn't smile. But I noticed the slight nod of approval.
Ihre ersten. Leaving the hospital wasn't easy.
3 weeks of bed rest had weakened my muscles. Even standing up made my ribs ache. But 2 weeks later, I walked out of St. Catherine's under my own power. Deborah waited outside with her car.
She wrapped me in a careful hug.
You look like hell, she said. I feel worse, I admitted. She laughed. Good. That means you're alive.
19.
The first place we drove wasn't my apartment. It was the house on Elm Street. My grandmother's house.
The small brick place with the porch swing and rosemary garden.
I hadn't seen it since the funeral. As we pulled up, something immediately felt wrong.
The garden was gone.
The soil had been cleared. A large for sale sign stood in the front yard. I stared at it through the windshield. He's already trying to sell it, Deborah said quietly.
I stepped out of the car slowly.
The porch swing still hung from the ceiling, but the cushions were gone. The windows were dark. Empty. My grandmother had lived there for 40 years. My father had erased her presence in less than a month. Kessler arrived a few minutes later. He stood beside the sale sign and read the listing information. Your father listed the property through a real estate agency, he said. Closing scheduled in 9 days. 9 days. He wasn't just stealing the house. He was trying to sell it before anyone noticed. Kessler pulled out his phone. "Good," he said calmly. "That makes this easier." "How?" "Because the buyers, the realtor, and the title company all become witnesses."
Mag Sinn.
2 days later, Kessler scheduled a meeting. Not at a law office. At the property itself. He invited the real estate agent,
The prospective buyers,
the title representative,
and my father.
The invitation simply said there was a legal clarification regarding the property deed. My father arrived 10 minutes early. I watched from inside Deborah's car parked across the street. He stepped out of his sedan wearing the same confident expression he always carried. The one that said he controlled everything. He didn't know I was there yet. Kessler greeted him on the sidewalk. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see my father's posture change when Kessler handed him a folder. He flipped through the documents. His face slowly lost color. That was when I stepped out of the car. My ribs protested as I walked toward the house. My father looked up. The moment he saw me, his eyes widened. For a second he actually staggered backward, like he was looking at a ghost. "You," he said. "You're supposed to be dead?" I finished quietly. The realtor and buyers looked between us nervously. Kessler spoke calmly. "Mr. Thomas, we have several questions regarding the power of attorney you submitted to transfer ownership of this property." My father tried to recover. "This is a family matter." "No," Kessler replied. "Now it's a legal one." He handed copies of the forged document to the buyers and the realtor. "The signature on this form does not belong to Wendy Thomas. And we have hospital records proving she was unconscious at the time." My father's face turned red. "This is ridiculous." But the buyers were already backing away. The realtor looked horrified. And the title agent had begun making notes on her tablet. For the first time in my life, my father looked unsure. But he still hadn't realized the worst part. Because the confrontation on that sidewalk wasn't the real exposure. The real exposure was about to happen somewhere else. Somewhere my father never expected. Where the truth about the DNR order
And the forged documents
would be seen by everyone he cared about impressing. My father had spent his entire life protecting one thing above all else: his reputation. To the outside world, Gerald Thomas was a responsible man. He ran a small accounting business. He volunteered at church fundraisers. He spoke proudly about family values whenever anyone asked. People in our town trusted him. They believed the version of him he showed them. But standing on the sidewalk outside my grandmother's house that afternoon, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear.
Not fear of losing the house.
Fear of losing the image he had spent decades building.
Ich gestern selbst.
After the confrontation with the realtor and the buyers, the property sale collapsed almost instantly. The buyers walked away within minutes. No one wants to purchase a house tied to a legal dispute. The realtor apologized repeatedly while gathering her paperwork. The title representative quietly informed my father that the county would now flag the deed transfer for investigation. Within 15 minutes, the yard that had been full of people was empty. Only 3 of us remained. Me, My father.
And Donald Kessler.
My father turned toward Kessler first. You're blowing this out of proportion, he snapped. This is a misunderstanding. Kessler didn't respond immediately. Instead, he handed him another folder. Inside were copies of the hospital incident report,
Pat's Dokumentation,
the signed DNR order, the timeline of that night. My father flipped through the pages quickly. His eyes landed on the line where Pat had recorded his exact words. Let her go. We're not paying for the surgery. He slammed the folder shut. You can't prove anything, he said. But this time, his voice lacked the confidence it once carried. Kessler simply replied, Actually, we can. 2 days later, the hospital administration scheduled a formal ethics hearing. When a nurse files an incident report involving life and death decisions, hospitals take it seriously. Especially when the report suggests a patient's treatment was refused for financial reasons. Pat attended the hearing. So did Dr. Hale. And so did my father. I sat quietly in the back of the conference room beside Deborah. The hospital board members listened carefully as Pat explained what happened that night. She read the timeline aloud. 10:47 p.m. Gerald Thomas arrives at hospital. 11:05 p.m. Discussion with billing department. 11:18 p.m. DNR form signed. Then she read his statement.
Word for word. No one interrupted.
No one questioned her memory. Because the report had been filed within hours of the event. Every detail documented.
Every timestamp recorded.
Then Dr. Hale spoke. He confirmed the conversation. Confirmed the DNR signature. Confirmed that if the surgery had not proceeded later that night, I would almost certainly have died. When the board asked why the DNR order had been reversed, Deborah stood up. She held up the healthcare proxy form. My friend trusted me with her life, she said calmly. And I chose to save it. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then one of the board members turned toward my father. Mr. Thomas, he said carefully. Do you dispute the statements made by the nurse and the physician? My father hesitated. For 30 years he had been able to talk his way out of situations. But this time the evidence sat on the table in front of him. And every person in the room had already read it. He cleared his throat. No, he said quietly. The board members exchanged looks. Then one of them spoke. While you had temporary authority as next of kin, this hospital strongly condemns decisions based solely on financial considerations. Another board member added, Your actions have been forwarded to the State Medical Ethics Committee. That was the moment my father finally understood. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about everything. The legal case moved quickly after that. Donald Kessler filed the fraud complaint with the county clerk. The forged power of attorney was invalidated. Ownership of the Elm Street house was restored to my name. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into the document forgery. My father's accountant license was temporarily suspended while the case was reviewed. Clients began leaving his firm almost immediately. In small towns, reputation travels faster than facts. But sometimes the facts are worse than the rumors.
Lebstessen-Test, Pan-WKD, Eperso.
Through all of it, I stayed quiet. I didn't give interviews. I didn't argue with anyone. I simply let the truth exist. That was enough.
9.
3 weeks later, my father came to see me. He knocked on the door of my apartment just after sunset. When I opened it, he looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Just diminished. He stood there holding a manila envelope. "I thought we should talk," he said. I stepped aside and let him enter. He placed the envelope on the table. Inside were documents transferring the Elm Street house fully back to me. Signed.
Notaries.
Filed correctly this time. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," he said quietly. I studied his face. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty there. "You tried to let me die," I said. "I was scared," he replied quickly. "The hospital kept talking about costs." I didn't raise my voice. "I was your daughter." The words seemed to hang in the air between us. He looked down at the floor. "I thought the insurance would handle it," he muttered. But even he didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. After a long silence, he finally asked the question he had probably been thinking about since the hearing. "Why didn't you fight harder before this?" I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly. "Because I believed you." He looked up. "All those years you told me how much I cost the family," I said. "I thought I owed you something." My voice stayed calm. But almost dying gave me time to think. And I realized something. "What?" he asked quietly.
You were wrong. Ich habte indemnisieren.
A week later, I returned to my grandmother's house. The for sale sign was gone. Deborah helped me plant rosemary in the garden again. The porch swing creaked gently in the afternoon breeze, just like it always had. For the first time since the accident, everything felt still. Peaceful. I sat on the porch and looked out at the quiet street. My grandmother had known exactly what she was doing when she planned her estate. She knew my father would try something. She just didn't know what. But she trusted that if the moment came, I would stand up for myself. And this time, I finally did.
Noch. Hatte.
The scar on my chest is still there. It probably always will be. A reminder of the surgery that saved my life when I was 4 years old. And the one that saved it again 25 years later. But the number my father used to repeat, $214,000, doesn't control me anymore. Because survival isn't a debt. It's a gift. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with a gift is refuse to let anyone convince you that you didn't deserve it.